All right, welcome everybody. This is the Konflux architecture call. It's October 8th today. We've got one point on the agenda. David, I think you're up with that one. It's continuing the discussion about the Workspaces API that we started in the last few weeks. If anybody is new to the call today, we've got an agenda that will copy the link back into sidebar. Feel free to add topics as you please, and we'll take them up after this topic concludes. David, do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen for people that want to. So in the meeting, you also see the notes, so you'll be able to see what I'm showing you here. Okay. So basically, there's two ADRs that kind of like this. They at first sight they might seem independent. I sent an email to the mailing list for the community, just explaining the relationship between these two. But basically, I want to get to a point where we decide on this. The sooner the better, because that decides my Q4 on my Q1 work. I want to say I mean for a team, right? And the decision is kind of peculiar because you cannot decide to accept both ADRs. You either accept one or the other. Um, you you could decide on one and not the other. You could decide not to support any of those and have a new idea. And I think you could also decide that you don't have enough information. Maybe you need a little bit more time to make a decision, right? So what I like to do with this meeting is, do we have a quorum, or everyone is comfortable deciding in the meeting? Or if not, I know there's a bunch of us on PTO, especially from Israel, that are, might have a say on this topic. Or we can decide on a process, at least in this call, to how do we decide on things like this, right? As long as we have a fair process, I think whatever decision comes out, we should commit to implement. So that's my take on that. Anyone has an opinion? Has people already read? Maybe you have questions on the two ADRs and you're confused. We can help you clarify that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think we should revise a little bit, or maybe state more cleanly which problems exactly we are trying to solve with these moves, because they are quite big moves in comparison to current state. So I was reading both proposals, and I have never seen clear requirements what we would like to achieve. So I believe it would be good to start with those. Could you please introduce or repeat or summarize what exactly we want to achieve in the end? I mean, not in the specific proposal, but in general.
In general, okay, yeah. Fair enough. And I wish Kyle was here because he's also part of this. But I'll give you my perspective. So 205 is basically a move to decommission or deprecate the concept of a workspace, which is a concept that we have upstream as well. The concept was implemented, in my opinion, incompletely, because it's a solution that, we had constraints on time for a POC and a conference. And then we came up with a solution to simulate the concept of a workspace. And there's mechanisms via GitOps to provision a workspace. A workspace for Konflux is basically a special namespace that allows people to run their pipelines for a specific set of applications. So when you see us saying, "Hey, I need a new workspace for this Konflux instance," or what it really means is, I want to create this workspace for a team that is actually working on a set of applications that they want to build, right? So Gal would like to get rid of that abstraction layer and then just deal with namespaces directly. And there's some limitations to do that. And, so basically upstream will not deal with the provisioning of workspaces, will not deal with the lifecycle of a workspace. Upstream will just assume there's a namespace per team that the team can provision somehow. It could be via an administrator. It could be via a third-party solution that provisions the namespaces, right? And then, the pipeline can run on those. So we have to make changes to the UI, how the UI sees workspaces to deal directly with namespaces. Go ahead. That's my take on what Gal wants to do. If anyone else has an opinion on that, this is a good time.
Ralph, do you want to go before me? Yeah, I would add. Thank you, David, for the introduction. But I would like to add several things. For me, the number one requirement is, and I think that Louis described it very well, is that if I want to use Konflux, I can just create a namespace like I do for every other add-on that I install on my cluster. I can create a namespace even using kubectl and start using Konflux. That's like the number one requirement for me. Another thing is to integrate with the existing way that the potential Konflux users manage their namespaces. Like, I don't know how our future users manage their namespaces on the cluster. Maybe they have their own tooling. Maybe they don't even use namespaces. Maybe they have a single namespace. Maybe they already have namespaces for their teams, and they just want to install Konflux and start use their existing namespaces without creating new. I don't know. So the second requirement for me is to be able to integrate to existing deployments and to existing processes that potential Konflux users will have. And when I'm saying users, I'm referring to people that will run Konflux. Yeah, so those are the requirements. And like, to summarize it, like, I would like Konflux to get out of the business of managing namespaces, because I don't think this is our core mission. You can take a look at any other add-on that you can install Kubernetes. I still didn't see any add-on, Tecton pipelines, Argo CD, KubeVirt, anything. I never seen an add-on that like creates namespaces for users. Like the way that it usually works, you install an add-on, you install an operator, and then it leaves to you how you want to create the namespaces for your users. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's it.
Cool. Anyone else on that 205?
You're on mute, Ralph.
I said I did have a comment, but I'm going to lower my hand and come back on it later. And I saw two other hands shut up. I think it was Mikola first and then Louis.
Yes, thank you. So the question that I was asking at the beginning was more about what's the end goal of this move. So yeah, thank you. It was really useful, I believe, to everyone to hear detailed explanation in general what those proposals are aimed to do. But I would like to clarify what's the real difference between current situations. So why do we do this move at all? So what's wrong with the current state? And what was the cause of doing this at all? Thank you.
Yeah, we're still in 205, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about these two proposals.
Well, the two proposals, I haven't spoken about the other proposal, but let's just maybe stick to 205 now, and then I'll speak about 208. And then we try to combine them, why they're related is what I think we should do.
Actually, maybe can I make a comment from a bit of an elevated altitude about why we should make a decision? I think we have clusters that we run, for example, that have KubeSaw, and we have a lot of features being provided by KubeSaw, like quoted management, multi-cluster, and things like that. And those are working well. On the other hand, we have this community artifact that we delivered, and we don't have KubeSaw in it. And we started working around problems that were introduced by removing KubeSaw. And at that point, we started to like diverge. And we need to stop that, right? We need to make a decision about how this is supposed to work that enables us to maintain like a single rational testable code base for all the deployment styles that we're going to do. And I think that was the catalyst for why these two proposals materialized.
Thank you for the context, Brian. Anyone
Thank
else on 205? Maybe Gal, you want to answer the last question?
I think
What's the end goal? What's the end goal? Like, how do you see the user experience today versus the user experience after the change? Upstream. Let's just start with upstream, right? This is a community call.
the end goal is to get out of the business of managing the namespaces and leave it to the user to manage in his preferred way, existing way. I don't think it's our mission. I think that we, in order to use Konflux, it would be better if like new adapters wouldn't need to learn about new ways to create namespaces, but just created directly.
How would that change the names, the UI experience? Like, how would someone onboard into Konflux?
It would. So if you look at the UI today, it doesn't change the UI experience at all, except for like if someone would try to use to deploy Konflux CI, the kind deployment, you will get the UI and you can see that like everything works as usual except for the for granting permission tabs, because this still uses KubeSaw APIs. There was no way to get over it without making changes to the UI code. But except for that, everything will be similar. You won't even know that.
Well, no, but you're still doing something to at least display the workspaces that a specific user has access to. Let's assume there's some mechanism to create create a namespace. In your case, you want to get rid of even the concept of a workspace. So in your case, is a user creates a namespace and a user provisions the permissions that they want. And then that user might not necessarily be the end user. It could be an admin or some sort of automation that happens that an admin configures, right?
Yeah.
What happens from the UI now that you're trying to get namespaces?
Okay, so what I said, what I've just said is that if you will use the UI, you won't see any difference. But for the UI to keep showing this workspace switcher, where you can choose which workspace you want to use, there is a need for a backend service that will provide this list, or to just give all the users permissions to list all the namespaces in the cluster.
Yeah.
The way that the UI works today, in its code base, in order to show you most of the tabs, it does a subject access review if you can create, delete, list application and components. Without, like, if you don't have those permissions, it won't even load the tab. So the backend component generates this list of workspaces in Konflux CI upstream today. What it does, it just lists namespaces on the cluster, checks for which namespaces the user that issued the requests has permissions to create, list, edit, etc., components and application, and then it returns it to the UI. So the UI can use it for subsequent requests.
But your proposal suggests that we should get rid of the workspace concept. So shouldn't we get rid of that workspace abstraction for reading namespaces?
So the yes, but if we change when we will change the UI, like if my proposal will get accepted, the UI would be changed. So when it lists namespaces, it would need to reach an endpoint that will show it. So there are two options. One, we tell the UI to reach a certain endpoint for listing namespaces, or we intercept the request for the namespaces for the Cube API. Okay, we intercept this request and then we return the list of namespaces that we want the user to see. Now, and like it will just work the same as today. The change would be that the object structures that we return. Today, we are like faking the workspace list that the UI expects to see, because we use the same UI, but without a backend that provides workspace implementation.
All right, so you're saying onboarding is not self-service, right? So onboarding will be, hey, I log in to Konflux. I don't have a namespace. Somehow, I'll need to request a namespace, right? Self-service is not going to be possible, right? If you want to do multi-tenancy.
Today,
So, yeah.
If you're asking me today there is no button to create a workspace or a namespace. If we would add this button to the UI, then it can be self-service if the person that runs Konflux grants permission to the user to create namespaces. And then the user would be able to click the button and the namespace would get created.
So that's a different role. It's not a self-service where a person logs in that wants to consume Konflux as a user, a builder, a developer. A developer comes in, I want to start using Konflux to build my thing. That person would never get access to create namespaces, right?
Can I ask, how does this work in the Fedora cluster today, Gal? A user, you can log in with your Fedora account system identity, and when you do, you immediately have a namespace of your own to mess with. How does that work?
So in that case, when what the UI is doing today, again, without changing the UI code, it looks for a user sign up, and then what we did is like to take this request for user sign up and create a namespace on the fly.
So this namespace provisioning going on. We're managing namespaces then today.
We are not managing namespace. So that's the case for that's the Fedora. Ralph asked about the Fedora cluster, where we had like a specific requirement for it. In my ADR, I said that it would be optional to provision namespaces on the fly when the user logs in. I don't mind how it would be made. What we did for the Fedora, it was quick for a specific case, not saying that this is how it should work. Okay. Again, I don't want to be in the business of managing namespaces. That's my end goal.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds clear to me. The only part that's not clear is how the UI is going to interact I think Barak has some interesting ideas I'd like to explore, maybe offline, because this is a completely different idea. But anyone else on this topic? I'd like to give me some time to go over what we're proposing on the 208 idea.
1 second. I think we should pay more attention to the hands being raised in sidebar. I'll try to moderate that a little bit. Ralph, you're next.
Thank you, Louis. I was trying to imagine in the Fedora case, if we want to maintain the user experience with Gal's proposal, where a user logs into the cluster and then just immediately gets a namespace with their own name, how would that be implemented? In Gal's proposal, it's meant to be flexible. Konflux, the project, doesn't care how you do this. You could use Argo on the side or some other flow for creating namespaces. But if you want that self-service workflow that we have today, what would you want? And I can imagine Fedora would want this, right? That anybody who is in the devel group or the packager group, when they log into the instance, they get their own namespace. And I guess that looks like an RBAC rule to grant everybody in that particular group the right to create namespaces. And that seems possible. It's not that it's like to the system authenticated group or like to the system unauthenticated group, but it's some particular group that the administrators of the Fedora instance would want to grant that to. And I think that makes sense as long as all of the other provisioning things for populating the workspace with necessary resources also exist. But I think Gal's proposal has that in there. Meaning the user experience can be the same tomorrow with Gal's proposal as it is today, with a self-service, walk in the front door, and you get your own personal namespace flow.
Anyone else has a hand raised? I'm not looking at because I'm sharing, so I'm not looking at the game.
You want to go next?
Yes, thank you. So I just would like to express my thoughts for those two proposals. And so I'm not saying, like, I'm sort of neutral and believe that the way we should go is somewhere in the middle. Let me explain a little bit. So first of all, we are targeting at community, to people who would like to use this product. And in Gal's proposal, we have a model that would leave it to the end user at all on how namespaces are created and so on. And this could lead to, in my personal opinion, to a situation when Konflux would be a set of sort of independent services that are combined together to make something work. It's really flexible because user can set up everything as they want. But this approach reminds me somehow how Kubernetes itself works. It's a quite complicated system. I believe that many of us still remember how they tried to set up Kubernetes for the first time. It's a really good adventure, and you can spend whole day on it and don't succeed the way you want it, because there are a lot of options. There are a lot of tools and stuff you should use. At least I failed to do it in a day for first time. So users usually want to have something working out of the box because, well, Kubernetes is quite a popular tool and people would invest in learning those, even if it takes more than a day. About Konflux, it's a big question because we are not so popular and there are another alternatives that could be way easier to do. And I believe that we should provide some sort of installer or another way that would bring completely working system to the user, like less of effort, ideally several clicks with default settings, and it would work out of the box. So I'm partially taking inspiration from one of the projects I worked very closely some time ago, Eclipse.js. So we were providing completely working system to the user. However, it was possible to replace parts, for example, OIDC provider, database, and stuff like that. But we had a default set, and it was an installer that just delivered it to the user. I agree with Gal that there is a use case, and it's pretty valid use case to not to manage anything at all. Because, for example, if I have personal cluster and want to have secure builds for my own projects, I don't need that user management at all. I own the cluster, I do my job. I use like namespace per project or something like this. So it's a valid use case, truly valid use case. But if you are targeting complicated system for many users, and we are targeting at what? Secure builds, then we need to somehow guarantee that security. So from the other hand. So I believe we should provide both options here in the end. But first, it shouldn't be overcomplicated. And second, it should have some defaults to make it user-friendly. That's my thoughts. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong at something, but at least thank you for the attention.
Well, thank you for the feedback. Excellent. Yeah, I think this is a good segue for me to talk a little bit about the proposal.
Before we go, can I do that? I've had my hand raised for a bit. Can I say something?
I don't see the queue. What is the queue?
Yeah. Yeah, if you click on the users, it's right at the top. But I'll just go ahead and say it. So I think it's maybe important to, and I tried to convey this in other comments. I think it's important to distinguish between the project and the deployment. I think the Konflux project upstream, we should aim for it to be as small as it can be and as flexible as it can be. So I think I lean more towards Gal's proposal in that sense, because if you are an organization that you already have a way of managing namespaces, you don't need to have something else conflicting with that. And that seems like creating namespace seems to be like a pretty standard procedure for anyone who's managing Kubernetes OpenShift cluster. But when it comes to the Red Hat deployment, I think we do need to make a decision of what's going to make those things in that case. And in my mind, those are separate things. I think the upstream project should be compatible and should work with whatever mechanism is creating the namespaces. Maybe it's Kubesaw, maybe it's something else. And I think if we can get to that position, I think the project will be better because it will be more flexible. But granted, I don't know all the technical details of the challenge that may come from that. I'm hearing that listing the namespaces is the only thing, but that seems like a minor thing to me. Like, you just put a text box in the UI, call it a day. Like, that seems like not a good enough feature for it to bring in like a whole nother dependency on another project. So those are my thoughts. I think those are two different discussions, and I think maybe we should set the framework around that, because I think otherwise we're gonna end up in the situation where we're mixing things, and if the upstream community we actually had like collaboration from other companies and whatnot, like we wouldn't maybe not even have this conversation there. It would be more like, oh, for our particular Red Hat deployment of Konflux, here's what we want to do. Anyways, just some of the thoughts that I wanted to share.
Luis, a quick follow-up on that same line of thinking. What about the Fedora cluster? You're saying the Red Hat deployments need to have something, obviously, right? What about the point that Ralph brought in? What's your take on that?
Yeah, and they will need something like that, and it should be whatever they are comfortable with.
Who's they? The Fedora people?
Exactly. Whoever's managing the cluster.
So the Fedora people decides how to do namespace management.
Sure.
Okay. All right. All right. So I need at least some time to describe. I mean, we spent 30 minutes on maybe one-sided. So the solution that the Workspace team proposes is basically geared towards creating a workspace abstraction, right? A normal Kubernetes extension, which should be a CRD. This defining what a workspace is, and a controller behind that, which actually manages the changes. Synchronizes the changes with the CRs, right? That get generated. To me, that's pretty simple. Is a UI would just be able to connect to the workspace and create workspaces, and it'll be able to change workspaces properties, and then let the controller decide underneath, what to do, how to implement the namespace provisioning, and how to provide the access to a specific individual identity or a group identity. So what I propose in the ADR is not just my idea; it's the idea of the team. We actually collaborated quite a bit on this, and then we suggest that for a default implementation of that controller, we can come up with a single cluster, multi-tenant, but single cluster solution that just locally provisions namespaces and creates the right role binding to the identity that's creating the workspace. So it gets rid of it creates a self-service solution where a user that just comes in maybe they don't know too much about Kubernetes, but they know, okay, so I need to create this specific YAML so that I can have the compute resources available so I can run my pipeline, right? So from that point of view, simplify the UI is simplified, and then it's up to the implementation of the controller to come up with the namespace. So yeah, we're managing namespaces, but in that local implementation, it'll be pretty simple. Create a namespace, add a role binding, maybe add some quotas if we want to do quotas, maybe add some initial bootstrap resources like maybe secrets for pooling, etc. Right? So the other implementation that we also put in that proposal is basically what we have in the Red Hat deployment is kubeflow. Kubeflow right now is not suitable for an upstream implementation. So maybe upstream we won't start with that. We'll start with the local deployment, and the local implementation will handle most of the cases, including a kind cluster. When you create a client cluster, you'll be able to use the UI or use the Kubernetes API to create a workspace, and off you go. And then the UI will show the workspace, and you can implement your pipeline there, right? kubeflow is in the process of making removing dependencies from OpenShift, and that will make it suitable for upstream at that point. So that could be an option for the future, and we might very well use that for complex systems in the future, right? It has some features that manages, for example, multi-cluster placement of namespaces, right? That could be something that people might want to have in the future if kubeflow becomes vanilla. The other solution that we propose is kind of like we have today upstream, but more streamlined, with an API in front. So it'll be more of a GitHub solution where a user creates a namespace, and then we let the GitHubs bootstrap it with additional resources like, role bindings and quotas and config maps, secrets, whatever the user needs to have. And that the admin decides that, right? So we're gonna make it so the admin decides what bootstrapping means for the workspaces in their environment. Okay, and this will be configurable. This will be something that it's gonna be defaulted, but it's gonna be configurable as well. So that's a solution that we provide. The user experience in this case, it'll be very simple. A user logs in, a user creates a workspace, it immediately becomes available. The user then goes and starts creating an application in the workspace. If they don't like that workspace, they can remove it. So it'll be a self-service click of a button or remove a resource, a CR from Kubernetes. and off it goes. It's deprovision, and then they can create another one, and then we can provide some limits on each identity, how many workspaces they can own. Now, once the workspace is created, the user could be able to create additional role bindings, and then that will be directly interacting with the namespace. But at that point, that user has the right admin role to do additional things. So it's that initial bootstrapping of that identity doing the self-service operation and getting the right permissions to then be able to bootstrap it further, or to give access to someone else, to give access to a group that Kubernetes trusts. If Kubernetes trusts an IDP, whatever group is created there, it'll be honor, right? So from my point of view, the end user experience is very, very simple and consistent. It doesn't matter what backend is being used. So it lends itself to someone experimenting. Do I want to adopt this Konflux thing? Easy, they can do it. And if they want to do a multi-cluster solution that needs to scale, it's the same API for the end user, right? It's up to the admin or platform engineer, that we call it, right, to set up the backend and set up what bootstrapping is and set up those things. But the user interface is consistent. They can set it up with GitOps if they want, as long as the GitOps provisions workspaces. They can integrate. So if you want to integrate with, let's say ServiceNow, an organization has ServiceNow to provision things, they can just integrate it there and say, hey, I want to provision workspaces for this new team. It gets the approval that ServiceNow provides, the approval workflows that ServiceNow provides, but then I have an API to go and create a workspace, which then, is self-service. From there, it continues happening, right? So it's easy to integrate. And the 3 backend solutions that we provide are just a beginning. We will create an interface, a signature that other members of the community can implement as a backend. Maybe they want to use OCM for managing multiple clusters, right? Maybe they want to use a combination of Argo and OCM to provision, do the placement and bootstrapping, right? So, the sky's the limit. As long as you provide that signature, hey, as long as you implement this, the controller will honor that mechanism to provision a namespace and manage a namespace. In my opinion, having a namespace and the community provisioning that namespace however they want will create multiple solutions. Each adapter has their own solution. Red Hat downstream will have a solution. Then Fedora will have a different solution. So it's going to be very difficult to create an integration point with Konflux, in my opinion. And it's also going to be able, we won't have a consistent way to extend Konflux when it comes to this, onboarding and offboarding of people and workspaces, right? So to me, it's like we're doubling down on the proposal from the workspace team is doubling down on the workspace concept, but actually implementing it the right way, the Kubernetes way. So that's my take on that.
To help me, David, you mentioned the ServiceNow flow. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? In the case where an organization wants to have ServiceNow tickets on file, say for everybody who's getting a new workspace or namespace,
right,
in a Konflux instance, do you imagine that the users would click join the waitlist in the API, and then there would be a 4th backend for trying to do the provisioning through ServiceNow, filing a ticket, and then administrators are going to create the namespace kind of on that ticket's behalf? Or do you imagine the user would start in ServiceNow to request a workspace, and then the ServiceNow automation would create
the workspace?
The
second one, basically. Yeah, second one. So you have a service, but then ServiceNow, whoever is integrating the ServiceNow extension now have an API, it has the workspace API to talk to, and it's consistent. It doesn't matter what backend is, doesn't matter what deployment of Konflux, right? So now you have the ability to say, okay, we integrate with ServiceNow no matter what the adapter is doing, because the adapter has this workspace API. And so if I want to get rid of the waiting list from our point of view, we shouldn't be in the concept of approval workflows. we should be just saying, hey, if a user has access to Konflux, they should be able to create a workspace. Similar to if a user comes to GitHub, they should be able to create their own projects in GitHub, right? So that's where we're coming from. It's like it's self-service. It's like I want to create another workspace, another word. Of course, there's limits. You can create eternal workspaces because you can create that to attack, right? And create too many, right? But the limits will be configurable in other words. So it's so that integration point. And when I say ServiceNow, I mean Jenkins. If someone wants to start with the workflow in Jenkins and use Konflux on the back end to ease the migration, they can do that. If they have another CI/CD pipeline and they want to start using some aspects of Konflux, not all of them, in their solution, they have the ability to do that, right? So I think does that answer your question, Rob?
It does. Thank you. I see Barack's got a hand up though.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was the last one with the hand up. All right, so David, I actually think the last thing mentioned kind of points at the direction where my opinion would be, which is you're saying something along the lines that the ability to create a workspace should be something that exists in all kind of, also the ability to kind of for user to in self-service create a workspace should be something that should be part of all different versions and installations of Konflux. And this is something I think I disagree with, precisely because of the second thing you say, which is in GitHub you will always have the way to create organization. And for me, this creates duplication, because essentially when users are using Konflux, they already have their data organized in GitHub or GitLab or both, right? And right now the experience is that then you need to reorganize similar data, like essentially the repositories, in Konflux as well, into the workspaces.
Right.
And I would like, to have the future to move away from that experience, which is why I would lean towards not making that a basic assumption in Konflux, that users would manually organize their data, but instead go to something very thin, like what Gal is suggesting, and then maybe build more automation on top of that to eliminate the need to manually organize the data.
Yeah. So
Right.
I mean, your solution. I've seen your solution is intriguing. I don't think I understand completely. We talked about it one-on-one, but it's intriguing because you're saying, hey, let's just let's have the UI interface with a Git repository, not necessarily Kubernetes cluster, right? And then let the automation under the covers figure out how to generate a namespace, how to create a bootstrap it, etc. And then the UI just talks to a repository. And then because it's talking to a repository, it's using the identity management that whatever that repository uses, right? So if it's GitHub, it'll, as long as the user has access to that GitHub, it'll be able to add things to it. Is that where you're taking this?
Well, not necessarily. Like I might have shown you multiple ideas kind of merged together. So yeah, but,
Yeah.
If you're trying to focus on this, if you're trying to focus on this, then I would say let's at least have the option to have the namespace and repo structure be derived from, let's say, GitHub, right?
GitHub. Okay,
So,
I see what you're saying.
One example of how this could work is you have some kind of a service scanning GitHub, finding all the repos in a predetermined set of orgs, and structuring your namespace to match that. So you end up having very similar permission structure in your cluster.
Yeah. To me, that's another way to manage namespaces, to be honest. So we will be in the business of managing namespaces.
Pointing at Gal's, which is why I'm pointing at Gal's idea and saying, right, this would be namespaces. Now we can make all kinds of very different ways, and we don't assume that the user has manual tools to manage namespace.
But you're completely removing the need for the user to access the namespace itself. And then by doing that, then we don't have the problem of self-service, because You don't have to provide access to a user to create namespaces, which that's one of the main things that is pointing us to create an abstraction layer, is to be able to manage that, right? So
Yeah, so this
if
is what I'm saying. There is
if
a
you
valid
yeah,
option to not do that.
exactly. Okay, but to me that's a separate ADR. I think that's a separate ADR, my friend. So it's like, it's not what we're. So Gal is saying, let's just manage namespaces. We're not gonna be in the namespace management business, and we figure out a way for the UI to interface with that in a safe manner. What I'm saying is, like, let's create that workspace abstraction, and that already solves all the problems of access control and then security, and then making sure that the users don't have extra access that it doesn't need, and then only has access to that workspace resource, which is that's but let's not kid ourselves, guys. That's the way Kubernetes intended CRDs to be used for, right? When they introduce CRDs, it's like, hey, we understand that we're not going to think of everything. You can extend Kubernetes, and this is the mechanisms to extend it. So the only drawback I see with the solution I have is, then we need to maintain the controller, and we don't necessarily have to maintain all the implementations of that controller. We need to maintain the implementations that we want, that we are opinionated about, right? And then let the community maintain the rest. And then we use in Fedora whatever we want, and we use in Red Hat whatever we want out of those implementations, right? The ones that we care about. And then we double down on that. We implement it very well to be secure, to be self-service, to be multi-tenant. Okay.
David, does that mean that people will have to implement alternatives? Like, if we were to work with like something else that manages namespaces,
Sure.
there will have to be an implementation for that.
Sure. Let's say, for example, the concept of a multi-cluster. If for some reason you want a single Konflux instance to manage scale to multiple clusters on the back end, the only way to do that today for us is kubectl. But let's say someone else says, no, I want to use OCM. I know how to use OCM. I've done it before. OCM has placement algorithms for namespaces built in, and I use Argo for bootstrapping the namespaces. Argo already has plugins with OCM. So that's another solution. It's way more complex, but it's way more scalable, secure, proven, right? Using mechanisms from the community. So all you need to do is say, okay, my controller is going to have this implementation, and that implementation is community driven. Let the community create that OCM Argo CD solution, right? And if we want to say, look, for now, we're opinionated about, we're going to go with single cluster. Sure, we have a default local implementation that, to be honest, it's very simple. Create namespace, create a role binding. That could be it, right? We don't need to do anything else. It's very simple to implement. But at least you keep that consistency, saying, hey, it doesn't matter if you're very, very simple, local, kind, or if you're planning to take over the world, the end user has the same API, and the end user can use tools to integrate with that API that they deem. If you have multiple solutions, Red Hat, Microsoft is interested in how we do things, right? If Microsoft has their own solution and we have our own solution with Fedora and with Rail, then how do I integrate with that? It's like, oh, is it the Microsoft solution? Then this is the integration point. This is the integration point, right? So one is going to use GitHub, the other one is going to use OCM, the other one is I don't know what to do. That's my point here. And I don't know, if we create like one or two solutions upstream, maybe we start upstream with local and GitOps, with GitOps helping with the bootstrapping of the namespaces that get created. That's more configurable from an admin point of view, so it eases the interface for the admin, because admin might be used to Argo CD and they want to, it's easy for them, right? Sure, let's start with those two. And if kubectl wants to be vanilla and get into CNCF, then they can do it. And then we can bring that. The implementation is already downstream, by the way. We already have a workspace abstraction. We don't need to implement, we already have 90% of the workspace API defined already. Just the backend that we're using now is Kubeflow. So
I wanted to make a point about consistency. For the Workspaces API, I hear what you're saying, David, that it could provide some consistency for services that are expecting to integrate with Konflux or interact with a particular with Konflux. For an organization, though, that's running a Konflux instance, I can imagine that they might appreciate consistency across all of the different things that they're running on Kubernetes, which I think is in line with Gal's proposal. That if they have a way, say through ServiceNow, for managing access, the creation of and access to namespaces, that if Konflux had a workspace API in front of that, they would need to implement a new path in their ServiceNow automation flow to interact with that workspace API, when under the hood, it's really just creating namespaces. This becomes like an extra effort for them to manage Konflux, which has a special notion of namespaces.
well, they should already have
when I go around and talk about Konflux with people, tell a story about you have a Konflux instance and it's up, and you go and click and log in and join, and as soon as you log in, you are provisioned a workspace, and then I have to say under my breath, which is really just a namespace, because people know what namespaces are, but they don't know that a Konflux workspace is the same thing. This it creates an inconsistency between what you know about Konflux when you're first coming to it, if you do already know something about Kubernetes, or if you already have automation that's interacting with Kubernetes.
I see. Yeah. On the point of integration with third parties already know how to create resources. You're saying, in this case, it'll be a workspace resource. So it's a YAML. It's not really a new API. It's just a YAML, right? The API is Kubernetes API.
Yeah,
and
but
then
their code base has to have that committed. You know what I mean? Like now they have to have something in there that says, "Oh, I'm going to create this thing called a workspace that's defined by this other project," which means that they need a code change to work with us. You know what I mean? And I think that's my concern. Is like, if there's code changes needed to work with Konflux, we're probably doing something wrong.
I don't understand the code change one, because resources are not. There's multiple resources in Kubernetes, right? So it's just a YAML.
But if there's
it's just a YAML that has a different name. So that's the beauty of Kubernetes.
David and Matt, I wanted to make a point about process before we end the call. We got 5 minutes left to the end of the hour. David, you were talking about making a decision at the beginning of the call. Louis linked it earlier, but I'll link it again. We've got a governance process defined in the community repo on GitHub. And so there's a governance committee that's myself and Andrew and Brian. And in the event, I'm going to paraphrase, we want the community to always come to consensus decisions as much as we can on every topic. Where we can't come to a consensus decision, which I think is in this case, then it's the governance committee's job to make a decision on that topic. So I think that's the next step. Brian and Andrew and I should get together, compare notes, and decide how we want to move forwards here.
I've had this question, which is, how do we prove that the community couldn't come
exactly?
to a decision?
I was going to ask the same thing, Brian.
That's fair.
Because I don't think this discussion proves that there's no consensus. I think we should move into a vote. I don't know if you have a voting mechanism in that document.
I don't think we do.
Every community I know has a voting mechanism for allowing new requirements.
I think it's super easy for us to do a vote. We can have a very simple Google form, and we will put basically one question in it and say, do you support ADR-X or do you support ADR-Y? We make it anonymous. We send it to everyone on the mailing list, and we put a deadline on it.
Yep, I like it. So maybe the options, can we agree on the options? Like it should be ADR 40, ADI 39, right? And then it cannot be both. You have to choose one or the other, basically.
Radio button.
Radio button, right?
Andy had a point in sidebar. Sorry to jump step, Greg. He'd like to see an option that indicates that you think both of the proposals need further development or further refinement, meaning you don't think we should take a decision. It sounds like a valid.
Like, I don't have a, yeah, like I cannot decide yet, basically.
Sure.
Okay.
I see Greg.
Yeah, to me, the first choice is 205. Do you want to have workspaces or not? Because if you don't have workspaces, then 208 doesn't matter anymore. So I think you should actually decide that one first. And you could still decide that you don't want to do the work David is talking about for 208, but keep workspaces.
Right, but also vote on if you like. That's why it should be either or, right? Like you say, I don't want to deprecate workspaces.
If 205 passes and we get rid of workspaces, 208 no longer is relevant.
That's correct. So, but then that would show in the vote, right? It's like everyone would pick 205, not 208.
I think Greg's point though was that we might say no to both, meaning no,
yes,
we're going to
yes,
keep the existing concept of workspaces, and no to
yes,
we don't want the expanded concept of workspaces.
Yes, yes. So that's another option. It's like 205, 208 in the red button, none, right? Which is probably what Barack wants to do, but because he wants to provide another solution, and then I can't decide yet. I need more time. And then based on that, you guys make a decision, Ralph, Brian, and Andrew. You
I'm
guys
just going to say binary
I think
choice
we're
is better.
out of time. We're both
Yeah.
out of time in this meeting, and we're out of time for this decision. I would like to get together with Ralph and Andrew. The governance board will put together a survey. We'll send it out to the mailing list. We're going to put, I think I want to have this done by next week. I'd love to make the due date for the survey the end of like the business day next Monday, so that we can announce the results of the survey in the architecture call next week.
That works for me. That works for me, guys. Yeah. Let's make a fair decision and then, yeah, move forward. I think we need to move forward.
Mikola.
Yeah, a small remark regarding the form. I believe we should have some explanation field where we can add additional thoughts, at least a little bit to our vote or some stuff. Thank you.
That's good.
Cool.
And with that, we're out of time. Greg had a point on the agenda about another ADR. Greg, do you want to say a word about it before we drop?
Yep, just letting people know it was there if they wanted to read it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Yep.
Thank
Bye.
you.